Okay, so today we are still factoring, except we're solving quadratics by factoring. Okay, we call this the zero factor property, which I'm going to explain in more detail here in a second, but just know that that is important for you to know. Okay, the zero factor property. So it says the solution to an equation is the x value of the x-intercept. In order to find an x-intercept, you let y equals 0 and solve for x. So knowing that, what that means is that when you have a point, that's your x-intercept, which is where y equals 0, the number here is your solution. Okay, so the number when y is 0 is your solution, the x value of your x-intercept. Okay, that's what that means. So knowing that, solutions are x-intercepts, our roots are zeros. If I ask you what's the root, I'm just asking for the x-intercept. If I ask you what's the 0, I'm just asking what's the x-intercept. Does that make sense? These three words can be interchanged all together. They're asking for the same thing. Yeah? This is super important. Cough, cough, hint, hint. It may or may not be on a test. Okay, so knowing that, we're going to talk about how many solutions there are possible. So if you have a graph that looks like this, how many solutions is that? Remember, your solutions are where it touches the x-axis. 0. There are no solutions. Don't say 0, because 0 is a number and that's telling me it touches at the origin, right? So this is no solution. It never touches the x-axis. Are we okay with that? Now, it could also be open downwards like this. Okay, it's not specifically up or down. It just doesn't touch the x-axis. Can it touch the y-axis? Yeah, if you look, eventually these are going to touch. So yes, it can touch the y-axis. It cannot touch the x-axis. Now, another option is to look like this, where the vertex is on the x-axis. How many times does that touch? Once. So you can have one solution. Now, if I say, what's the solution, you're not going to tell me 1, because that's not, well, no, it's not where it touched. It touched at 2, so my solution is 2. Now, you could also write that as the point 2, 0. However, you're going to see me write it like this the most. Do y'all know what fancy brackets stand for? It's your set of solutions. So they're called braces technically. I know we call them fancy brackets, but it just means that's your set of solutions. So if I were to use parentheses, especially when there's 2 answers, it's going to look really weird. Okay, so then your other option is to have 2 solutions. So you could have something like this and like this. I put them first so they're pretty, where it touches twice. So this is 2 solutions. But if you wrote them, the answer would be -1, 1, 2, 3, 4. Because it touched at -1 and 4. So that's my solution set. Any questions with that? Okay, so knowing that, let's look at these. So first things first, what does f of x mean? It's your y. F of x is just y. X is x, but f of x is y. Okay, so if I ever tell you f of x, isn't that just a fancy way of saying y? Yeah. Yes, so here when I say y equals 0, it's the same thing as saying f of x equals 0. Okay, so knowing that, if you saw f of x equals your quadratic equation, ax squared plus bx plus c, and you're trying to solve it with a zero factor property, you're going to set it equal to 0. So your goal is to always get it equal to 0 and a, b, and c on the same side. Okay, so knowing that, let's look at the first one. So first things first, is it set equal to 0 where a, b, and c are on the same side? No. And I want you to realize this is my A, this is my B, and this is my C, but my C is on the wrong side, so what do I need to do? Move it over. So I'm going to do -12 on both sides. Okay, so we get x squared minus 4x minus 12 equals 0. So now I have it set up. Okay, and we're doing zero factor property by factoring. So we're going to factor. So we have A, B, C. A is 1, B is -4, C is -12. So if you weren't here yesterday, that's what you missed. We did a factoring review. So if you need a factoring review, yesterday is a good day. And I'm going to factor it. So remember, A times C on top, 1 times -12 is -12. B on bottom is -4. A is 1, so 1x, 1x. So we need to figure out what multiplies to give me this and what adds to give me this. So what multiplies to give me -12 and adds to give me -4? Yeah, -6, +2. Now you can use your calculator trick to do that if you need to. Okay, because A is 1, those are my factors. So I'm going to rewrite this as x minus 6, x plus 2 equals 0, because this and this are equal. We just factored it. So zero factor property pretty much means that if you multiply by 0, what's your answer always? 0. Okay, so at one point, if this factor equals 0, isn't this all going to equal 0, so that would make it true? Yeah, if this factor equals 0, would it all equal 0, so that would make it true? So you have to set both factors equal to 0 and solve them. So these are super simple to solve. They're usually 1 or 2 steps. So I'm going to add 6. This was 1 step, so I get x equals 6. Here I'm going to do minus 2, so I get x equals -2. So my solution, I always list them in fancy brackets, least to greatest, is -2, 6. Because what this means, y'all, if I graph this, is that my graph touches at -2 and +6, so it's going to look something like this. And I know it's upright because it's a positive A. Okay, so knowing that, there is another way to write your answers. You could also write your answers as x equals -2, x equals 6, or you can write them as points, -2, 0, 6, 0. Now, I'm always going to write them this way because I don't know, I think that's the easiest way as a set of solutions. But there are these 3 different ways, and if you write it one of those 3 ways, it will be accepted. Now, I do need you to know that it's where y is 0. If you had 0, -2, and 0, 6, would that be the right answer? No, because that's a whole other point. That's here. That would be here and way up here. Is that the right answers? No. You see what I'm saying? So be very, very careful with what point, where you're putting 0 if you write it as a point. Okay, any questions with this one? Okay, so now I'm going to show you a trick. When A is 1, this always works. So we like when A is 1 because it makes our life easy. I wanted to show you the mathematical way first. But if once I get it equal to 0, so this step, not this one, I have x squared minus 4x minus 12. I'm going to hit graph. So my graphs are pretty similar, right? Shows me the same thing. I know that I have 2 solutions. This is a good reason to always graph it, is it'll tell you how many solutions you have. Well, guess what? I can go to my table. Isn't 6 a solution? Okay, guess what? If I go to -2, is that also a solution? Yeah. So could I have found both of my answers in the calculator for this one? Yeah. That works every time A is 1. Y'all, think smarter, not harder. If you don't have to factor it to find your solutions, don't factor it to find your solutions. Yes? Now, if any of y'all have to take the TSI, you probably won't get a graphing calculator for this portion of the test. So, because you know, I don't know if y'all, have any of y'all actually taken it, the TSI? No. Okay, when you take your TSI, it's on the computer, and it offers you a calculator, and then it doesn't. So, like, it'll always offer you, like, a little calculator, like the one you have on your phone for free, you know? But it doesn't offer you a graphing calculator every single time. So, sometimes it might, sometimes it might not. So, you might have to actually factor it, and you know how, because that's what we're doing, but you don't always have to. So, in my class, can you just type in y equals? Yes. So, if you look at number 2, first things first, what do we need to do?
Get the 6 on the other side.
Yeah, we need to get the 6x on the other side because we need it to equal what?
0.
0. Now, what I want you to realize is this is my A because it has a squared. This is my B because it has an x. And this is my C because it has no letters. Does that make sense? So what am I moving?
6.
The 6x. How do I move that 6x? Minus it. And where's it going to go?
In the middle.
In the middle. So I'm just going to kind of squeeze it right here. And then when I rewrite, I have x squared minus 6x plus 9 equals 0. Now, because a is 1, what can we do? Just put it in the calculator. So I'm going to hit x squared minus 6x plus 9. It is always, always, always important to hit graph first. Because how many solutions am I looking for? One. It only touches once. If you thought, or you didn't look at the graph and you're sitting here and you're like, oh my gosh, why do I only find 0 one time? Do you really want to scroll forever and do that? No. So there's only one solution, and what is it? 3. So you could write it as a point, but if you write 3, 0 inside these fancy brackets, you're telling me it touches at 3 and at 0. So if you use fancy brackets and you write 3 and 0, now if you wrote it as 3, 0 like this, that's telling me it's 1 point solution. Does that make sense? These are very different. You can't interchange the parentheses in the fancy brackets. So we did this one in the calc because a equals 1. Now, one thing I do want to show you actually before we keep going is that if you were to factor this, you would have gotten x minus 3 equals 0. They're the same. So if I solved them, am I going to get the same number twice? Okay, does it ever touch the same number twice? It cannot. So if you have the same answer twice, that just means it touched one time. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Okay. So let's look at number 3. So this one's already set up for me. But a, is it 1?
No.
So can I do this one in the calculator? No. And I'm going to show you what happens if you do try to do it in the calculator. It's never a bad thing to type it in your calculator, because what if you have no solution? Do you want to try to sit here and try to do all this work to find out there's no solution?
No.
No. So if you hit graph, how many solutions do I have? 2. So I know I'm looking for 2 solutions. You can even check the table. Well, look, I find one of them. But do you remember that you had the rainbow for this when we did quadratics the first time? Okay, well, what I want you to realize is that your 0 should be somewhere over here on the other side of those negatives. Okay, well, it would fall between -3 and +4. Do you see it there? No, because x is 0 is not what I'm looking for. I don't care if x is 0. I'm looking for where y is 0. So I don't find my other point, and I know there are 2. So I have to find my other point. Now I do know that -3 is one of my answers. So when I factor, if I don't get -3, I made a mistake. So it's not bad to type it in your calculator. Look, I actually prefer you do it. So let's get started. So I know A is 2, B is 5, and C is -3. So pretty much what this tells me is that when A is not 1, I'm going to have at least one fraction for an answer, if not 2. Okay? So knowing that, let's factor it. A is 2, so we have 2x, B is 5, so that goes on the bottom. A times C goes on top, so 2 times -3 is -6. Now, what multiplies to give me -6 but adds to give me 5? -1 and +6. If you wrote 6 and -1, is that okay?
Yeah.
Does order matter on where you put the numbers?
No.
No, as long as they're the same. Now, does 2 over 1 simplify?
Yeah.
To 2, but doesn't it have to be a fraction?
Mm-hmm.
So don't I leave it? Anytime you have 1, either if it's on bottom or top, leave it alone. That's correct. Now, what about 2 over 6? What does that simplify to? 1/3. If you needed to do it in the calculator, you could have 2 over 6, and it gives you 1/3, so that works. Now we bring over our x, and we bring over our plus sign. So my answer becomes 2x minus 1, x plus 3, equals 0. No, if you did x plus 3 and 2x minus 1, that's totally fine. Order doesn't matter. Think about multiplication. What's 2 times 3? 6. Is 3 times 2 also 6?
Yeah.
Yeah, order doesn't matter when you're multiplying. As long as the insides match, that's all that matters. Okay, so now we set them both equal to 0. 2x minus 1 equals 0. X plus 3 equals 0, and we solve them. Well, here, isn't this the one? It gives me x equals -3. Didn't we say if we didn't get -3, we made a mistake?
Yeah.
So we did it right. We got -3. And on this one, we have to add 1 to both sides. And you have 2x equals 1. But now, how do I get x by itself? Divide by 2. So like I said, sometimes it's a 2-step problem. A lot of the times it's a 1-step problem. So my answer, we write least to greatest inside fancy brackets. My least number is -3, comma 1/2 is my greatest number. Any questions there?
So if it's two solutions, you should have two.
Okay, so let's look at number 4. So number 4 looks like this. So first things first, we need it to equal 0. Does it equal 0?
No.
No, but I want you to realize this is my A, this is my B, this is my C. So what's this guy? Is he part of my A, B, or C? C, because he doesn't have an X. So when I move him over, minus 8, he goes with my C value, and they combine because they're like terms. So I get 12x squared minus 14x minus 10 equals 0. Now, before I factor, what should I always check for? Does this have a GCF? Yes, and I know that they're all even, so I know I at least have a 2. 10 is my smallest number. Does 10 go into 14 or 12? No. What else goes into 10? 5. Does 5 go into either of those? No. So what about 2? Yes. I always start at my biggest factor and work my way down. That's why I said 5 before 2, because if we said 2 and we're like, oh yeah, that works, and then 5 was actually my GCF, that's bigger because it's greatest common factor. You could use your math right 9 just like we talked about yesterday if you need to. So now this is what I have, and I want you to remember we're not looking at these two anymore. We're looking at this one. Now, the way we know if there's no solution, this one does have a solution, but the way we know if there's no solution is if we try to factor this and it's not factorable. Right away, that's one of your no solutions because it doesn't touch, okay? I guess not always, but a lot of times. So that's when you would graph it and check it. Okay, so now what do I do? I have to factor the inside. So A, B, C, and I'm using this. So I have 6, -7, -5. A is 6, so 6x, 6x. B is -7. A times C is -30. What multiplies to give me -30 but adds to give me -7? Nope. It's actually a really simple one. Yeah, -10 and +3. It's one of the ones that you're like, oh, duh. But it makes you think. Okay, so do either of these simplify?
Yeah.
They actually both do. So we have to simplify them. Alpha y equals enter 6 over, remember I said don't type the negative, 6 over 10, and that gives me 3 over 5. So this becomes 3 over 5, bring over my x, bring over my negative. So 3x minus 5 is one of my factors. What does 6 over 3 simplify to? 2. If you type in your calculator 6 over 3, it gives you 2. But what did I say you have to have over here? A fraction. You have to have a fraction. Because if what you were doing is if it was just 2, that would be a GCF at the beginning. That wouldn't be something you factor to find. So you have to have a fraction here, so it's 2 over 1. Bring over your x, bring over your plus sign, and it's 2x plus 1. And that all equals 0. So now we use our zero factor property. We do 3x minus 5 equals 0. 2x plus 1 equals 0. If you skip this step of writing it equals 0 and you just go from here to here, that's fine with me. Okay? So here we're going to add 5 to both sides. And we get 3x equals 5. Now what? Divide both sides by 3, and you get x equals 5/3. I do want y'all to always leave these as fractions, okay? -1 minus 1, 2x equals -1, divide by 2, and you get x equals -1/2. Least to greatest, so -1/2 is smaller than 5/3. What if they were both positive and we weren't sure? Because if you're like me, I don't look at fractions and be like, oh, 1/2's bigger or 5/3 is bigger. That's just not how my brain works. So remember, if they were both positive and you weren't sure which one was smaller because you write them least to greatest, you would just divide. 1 divide 2, 5 divide by 3. Which one's bigger? The 1.6 is bigger than 0.5. So you would have wrote 5/3 second. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Okay. Last one, I did change this problem, so go ahead and cross off the original and write the new one. What do I need to do first? Move the 9. So I'm going to do -9. Why don't I want to move the 4x squared? Yes, but are we allowed to have a negative a?
No.
No, if we have a negative a, we have to take out a negative 1 no matter what. Even if there's no number GCF, you have to take out a negative. So if you move that, you just add one more step. Do you want one more step? I do not want one more step. So a lot of times, if my a is negative, I will always move that one versus moving, even if there's like 2 on that side, I'll move both of them to make my life easy. So I have 4x squared minus 9 equals 0. And I'll show you what I mean by that here in just a second. Now, is this something I'm going to snowflake?
No.
But I'm still factoring it. How am I factoring it?
Square root.
The difference of squares. They're both perfect squares, so it's the difference of squares. Do you remember that?
Yeah.
It's a perfect square minus a perfect square. First off, is there a GCF? No. If there's a GCF, you always have to take that out, but there is no GCF here. So remember, this is a perfect square. We could square root both numbers. What times what gives you 4x squared? And what times what gives you 9? So this is 2x minus 3, 2x plus 3. So we set them both equal to 0 and solve. So I'm going to solve them quickly. Now they look very similar, but one is going to be negative and one's going to be positive. Okay, there's one more thing I want to show you. I don't remember what number it is, but I'll tell you in just a second. Which I'll finish writing that.
The next one's gonna be light too.
Okay, so look at number...
Is it not?
Yeah, just look at number 6. You see how your a is negative? Okay, so I'm going to move a to make it positive. Now you could have moved these 2 to move to the other side, but then you have to deal with that negative. But if you move the negative a, so add 2x squared, add 2x squared. Now I have 0 equals 2x squared minus 5x plus 2. So now it's simple. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Your a is positive. You don't have to worry about it. There's one more thing I want to show y'all. Look at number 12. I'm going to change this one because I don't want to talk about this until tomorrow or the next day, whatever day's next. This, we're just going to fix, it's 18x squared plus 6x minus 24. So I'm just taking off an x. I don't want the x as a GCF yet. We'll talk about that as our next notes. So it still works, but just take off that x. Okay? So this is what you're working on. If you have questions, what should you do?
I have a question.
Ask. Okay.